Hello and welcome to World Talks with me, Ashim Kumar. Russia is facing mounting battlefield losses, growing economic strain and fresh diplomatic setbacks, while reports suggest that Moscow may recruit another 30,000 North Korean troops to sustain its war effort. As President Zelensky prepares to visit Washington, questions are growing over Vladimir Putin's political resilience and whether the stronger US backing could alter the course of the war. To explore these questions, we're joined by Stephen Moore. He's founder of Ukraine Freedom Project and a regular contributor. Stephen, welcome back. Great to have you in the studio.
Always great to be here.
Thank you. So, let's start with the president of Kazakhstan, Mr. Tokayev, and he said in very diplomatic language that he believes Putin should go for a ceasefire. They met at a conference in Siberia recently. Was that embarrassing, do you think, for Putin?
Vladimir Putin, the leader of the former Soviet Union, the heir to the military power of the Soviet Union, the man who desires to be the next Peter the Great, to be a historic figure in Russia, is being lectured by the president of Kazakhstan, a man whose name I did not know until today.
Right.
So, yeah. So, I think that's pretty embarrassing. That's pretty humiliating.
Right. So, I mean, what is this indicative of, Stephen? I mean, if the president of Kazakhstan can say something like this, what about the elites in Moscow? Or people in China? They're saying, well, hang on, Putin, you're not winning this war.
Yeah. Well, I assign to President Tokayev, I looked up his name, I assign motives that, he's like trying to tell his friend, like, hey, man, what you're doing is really stupid. Maybe you should think about it. Kind of like when one of your friends takes your side and says, you're kind of making a fool of yourself here. And I think it causes him problems as well, because they're an oil-producing nation, and they, when there's bombing upstream, then that causes a problem for Kazakhstan. So everybody's tired of Putin's foolish adventure in Ukraine.
Right. So what next then, Stephen? I mean, if it sounds like pretty shaky foundations, both inside and outside Russia. What next?
Well, I grew up in the Cold War. I grew up when the Soviet Union was a very scary place. And I remember in the 80s, whenever one of the Soviet leaders would die, they would say that he's caught a cold. So I expect Peskov at some point to come out and say, Vladimir Vladimirovich has caught a cold. And that's the last we'll see of him. But I don't know. There is mounting pressure from all sides for him to stop this, this crazy, stupid war in Ukraine.
Pointless.
What's that?
Pointless war.
Yeah,
I mean, he's getting nowhere with it.
Yeah. And, if Ukraine had Patriot missiles, they would be, it would almost be unfair because they'd be taking free punches at Putin. But, Putin is now launching in these ballistic missiles. July has been a very deadly month. They've, about twice as many people in Kyiv has died from missiles than has died in the previous month in June. So this is a real problem.
And I think it's also worth reminding everybody that these are being targeted at civilian targets. So, a war crime there, and has been from the start of the war.
Yeah. I mean, there's thousands of Ukrainians have been killed. And
deliberately killed. They weren't,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I remember in the summer of 2024, about 2 years ago, I remember being on site at a children's hospital where Putin had bombed the cancer ward of a children's hospital in Kyiv.
Yeah, I remember that.
And, it was horrible. How do you get more horrible than that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, he seems to be preparing to become more horrible than that. He's importing, according to President Zelensky, 30,000 North Korean soldiers because he's losing more on the front line than he can recruit in Russia. And he's importing military equipment from North Korea.
Well, the Ukrainian front has become such a kill zone for people fighting for Russia, whether it be Russian or Cuban or African or North Korean. 30,000 is just going to keep them going for a month. You know, the average life expectancy of a new recruit on the battlefield in Ukraine, and this is according to Russian mill bloggers, is 35 minutes.
Right.
So, you know, these guys are going to get churned through pretty quickly. And where's he going to find more?
Right.
So, you know, and if he does a conscription, look, it's already very unpopular because the Ukrainians are bombing an e-commerce company, right? People can't get their goods delivered to them, and it's making the war very unpopular. Now, imagine if there's a conscription, you know, and people that actually have to go to fight, because everyone right now that's fighting in Ukraine, every Russian and everyone else is a volunteer. They're getting paid well, and so, you know, my American friends say, you know, I feel sorry for those Russian kids that have to go there because Putin sent them there. You know, Putin didn't send them there. They volunteered, and they went over there, and they're behaving badly, and they're causing war crimes. They're committing war crimes. So, you know, don't feel sorry for those folks.
No. Although he has managed to stay away from recruitment in Moscow and St. Petersburg, because, of course, they're the influential elites compared to the rest of the country.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Do you think he might actually be forced to start, conscription in the cities as well?
Well, I think that'll be his last alternative. I think there's a lot of people that'll be, you know, pulled out of villages in the Urals or Siberia or elsewhere, you know, that will be forced to do that. He's trying to keep those places insulated. I just read something today that they're taking gasoline away from the other regions of Russia and sending it to Moscow, so that Moscow is happy.
Right.
And those are the people that keep Putin in power.
Right. Well, I mean, you mentioned fuel supplies, and of course that's another way in which the average person on the street is feeling the impact of this war.
Yeah.
Which they haven't been in the big cities, at least.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. You know, you see these photos of cars lined up for miles to get fuel in Russia. And you know, the other thing that's keeping this war going is the purchases of Russian energy by everyone ranging from China to India to Spain, Belgium, France, Slovakia, Hungary,
Greece.
Turkey. Yeah. You know, European NATO countries combine, at least every day in May, they combine to buy enough Russian fossil fuels to fund 4,700 Shahed drones every day. Every day.
Yeah.
So, you know, Belgium right now is on track to send 3 times more money to Russia for cheap LNG than they are to Ukraine for its defense. So if we're going to be successful in making Putin stop, it's got to come both ways. The Ukrainians are doing everything they can.
Right.
And they're doing it quite well. And so, you know, Ukraine's allies need to pretend like they're at war.
Right.
And stop funding both sides of this war.
Well, I mean, the EU has just issued its 21st package of sanctions, but as you say, all these things are kind of going under the radar. It would seem.
Yeah, and there's and they're trying to put an extension on the period of time in which you can buy Russian energy. And so it's just the EU is almost, but not quite, completely worthless.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So and that's actually an unfair statement. There's 6 countries in the EU, 6 countries, European NATO countries, that are behaving badly. And you know, you've got Germany, which is nearly double its defense budget. You got the Scandinavian countries. You know, Poland obviously is the military leader, but there is the southern and western countries in Europe are just are a joke in terms of military.
Right. Now, President Zelensky is going off to the States. He's going to meet President Trump, in Washington next week. President Trump seems to be warming towards Zelensky. I mean, what caused this shift, and what do we expect from this meeting next week?
Well, Trump is a complicated man, and he's a simple man. Trump likes backing a winner. And I think the pivotal point in this war came in May. And that's when Vladimir Putin called President Trump and said, hey, I want to have this military parade, but I really am afraid to, because I think Zelensky will bomb it. Can you call Zelensky and ask him not to do that? You know, that is not a power move.
Right.
You have a military parade, just show you're strong, right? And if you have to beg for protection for your military parade, you're not strong. So, and it's just transparent. I think probably that's what, I think he just looked incredibly foolish, and he has, Tucker Carlson, who's not someone I look to for wisdom, said after he interviewed Putin, he said, you know, that's not a man that has to explain himself. Putin does not have to explain himself frequently. And so Putin lacks a sense of self-awareness. So everyone else thinks he looks foolish, and he just has no sense of it.
So what do you think is going to happen in Washington then between the two presidents?
Well, I thought it was a nice move by President Zelensky to bomb a couple of Iranian or Russian ships bringing weapons to Iran.
Right.
You know,
so,
it's like, hey, let me help you out here.
A bit of an icebreaker to the conversation.
So I think Zelensky's kind of hitting on all cylinders in his diplomatic and information war. And you know, we had the benefit of Laura Loomer coming to Ukraine, who is not someone I've ever met, but you know, I certainly appreciate her coming over, you know, and risking her life to tell MAGA, to tell the America First people exactly what we're all seeing inside Ukraine. So that's helpful.
Now, it's interesting. I mean, there's been a pause in the conflict between Iran and the United States, and some are saying it's because missile stockpiles, American missile stockpiles, are depleting. What does that mean in terms of how much support the US can provide to Ukraine? Because you mentioned Patriot missiles earlier, but Patriot missiles and other materiel.
Yeah. Well, you know, the Americans are not sending weapons to Ukraine, but Europeans can buy weapons, or Ukrainians can buy weapons. And, you know, and Ukraine is doing pretty well, but they can't defend themselves against the ballistic missiles that come in at you know, a million miles an hour. And so they need Patriot missiles, because those and a couple of other different types of missiles are the ones that can actually protect them against that. And you can only make, so Raytheon and Lockheed Martin combine and collaborate on this. They can only make 600 of them a year, and the Americans used about 800 of them in this last go-around in Iran. And in the history of the war, the Ukrainians have used about 600. So, and U.S. military doctrine says that if you have something coming at a high-value target, like a U.S. military base or a building in Dubai, then you should fire a Patriot missile at it. And if it's something worth firing one, you should fire two to make sure it does the job. And so you've got $8 million worth of Patriot missiles coming to take out a $35,000 Shahed drone. And that math doesn't work. And America and the Pentagon and military planners throughout Europe and Asia need to figure out that doesn't work.
Indeed. And in fact, I think the drone technology is a game changer, quite frankly. Stephen, I'd love to continue our conversation. Unfortunately, the clock has beaten us. I know, terrible. We're just warming up. Thank you as always.
Of course, great to be with you.
And you.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.